Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me here today. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this afternoon about a number of things very, very briefly. And if you want, I'll stay for the networking. So if you want to reach out and ask more about something specific, please do. I'll start by telling you a story about how far I believe we have come in terms of the menopause conversation in the workplace. And I think we've still got a way to go for sure. But I had an experience a couple of weeks ago where we got a new starter at work. He was our new director of social media, which was a role that when I started in recruitment, obviously we never had. We didn't even have a computer, let alone a social media director. And I think I should say at this point that my day job is the head of talent and inclusion at the Adecco Group, which is a global recruitment company. So this guy came to see me and he was asking me lots of questions about social media and blah, blah, blah. And then he said to me, clearly been doing his research, but he said to me, "Can I ask you a question, Helen?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "When you were perimenopausal, did you have really heavy periods?" And I thought, blimey, that's quite an opening gambit for a first meeting. And I said, "Yeah, I did." And he said, "Oh, well, I was just asking because my wife's really, really struggling. And I just wondered if I could ask you for some advice." And at first I was a little bit taken aback, but then I thought, actually, that's amazing that he felt comfortable in the workplace that he could ask me that question. And I think that is a real, for me, it's a part and parcel of my second role, which is the government's Menopause Employment Champion, to really be honest and open about experiences that women have in the workplace. You know, 44% of women struggle with heavy periods during perimenopause and menopause. That's a lot of women. And you know, not all of them don't have that opportunity to be in an autonomous role. I'll talk to you shortly about the different types of roles that we're considering in the government's work. But there's a lot of information out there, and I can only share with you what we've done as an organisation and what's worked for us. So you're a very different organisation. I understand from the information that I've found and I've been given that 9% of firefighters are female, 7% of on-call are female. So I'm struggling now. 77% of you don't call it a call centre, do you? You call contact centre are female, and 54% of Green Book. So you either are in a position where you may want to recruit more into those active service roles, or certainly retain the women that you already have in those roles and in your contact centre and Green Book roles. So there's a lot of information out there that you can use, and you know, I was talking to Louise earlier, and you know, there is almost too much, and it's a multi-billion-pound industry. So it's always really important to look at what works for you, what's best for you. We started off by launching a menopause policy in our organisation. And I've got to be honest, I thought I'd done a great thing when I'd launched the policy. Only 10% of organisations had a policy at that time. And I almost thought it was a bit of job done. In hindsight, 2 years on, it was really, and as I tell clients now, it's a PDF at best. It's a file that you put away in as part of maybe a broader ED&I strategy or policy, or part of a women's health policy. And if you broaden it out into a women's health policy, you're already a step ahead of what I did 2 years ago. But I now tell organisations that that's the thing to do, because it opens up the conversation to the broader generational piece. So if you only take away one thing, having that broader women's health policy is really impactful, because what I found was I was only attracting, of our 64% of females in our organisation, so we are very female-centric, I was only getting people coming to the workshops, the training, the allyship programs who were in that sort of 50 plus category, when actually even, you know, average age of perimenopause at 41, average age of menopause 51. But what about all those people that can go into it earlier than that? So broadening out that conversation is really important. So that policy, whilst I thought at the time I was the bee's knees, I'd done a great thing, even now that's evolved significantly over time. What that did do, though, that was really important and really impactful in our organisation is it started to change the conversation and it started to change the culture of the organisation. The things that I did around the policy were, one of them was to launch a series of podcasts with really senior leaders in the organisation who talked about their experiences. What that did was allowed other people to think, actually, if that person in that really senior role is struggling with, as an example, brain fog, it's all right for me to talk about the fact that I could be struggling with that. I could be struggling with anxiety, some of the more practical symptoms. So that using that podcast was really powerful, and we still do it now, and we've gone on to do it with a lot of other topics that we probably wouldn't have felt we could cover had we not started with menopause in the workplace. And having that vulnerable leadership, again, is really powerful. We've had men talking about their mental health challenges and gone on to set up a shoulder-to-shoulder programme. We've had a colleague who had experienced multiple baby losses throughout her 32-year career at Adecco, and she's set up a holding hands network for colleagues who are going through the same thing. So that really human aspect of it is really important in the workplace. The second thing I would say is education. I cannot stress how much and how important it is to make that education piece mandatory, to make sure. I've seen some of you who've got Dr. Louise's book. That's a brilliant starting point, you know, and there's a lot of other things that that Balance do that you can access and use to create that educational platform. So the education for the individual, and I say individual very specifically because everybody's experience of perimenopause and menopause is entirely individual. So being able to track their own symptoms and experiences on something like the Balance app is really important. It's also, in my experience, a really good tool to start a conversation with, whether that be with your manager, whether it be with your partner, or whether it be with a GP, that you are armed with the information. And it's almost a prop to start the conversation if it's a difficult conversation. So having that manager training is really important, and I would say, again, I can only tell you what I did wrong first time around and what I'm doing better now. I didn't mandate that manager training, and I made it voluntary at the start because I thought, oh, this is going to be a bit awkward trying to, you know, get male leaders in the organisation to come on some training right after we've launched the policy about something that a word they've probably never even mentioned before. So I didn't mandate it. I wish I had. I do now. So we annualise our training. The first time I ran it, I had two men on it. One of them had dialed into the wrong call and he was too embarrassed to dial off. But I've had a much better uptake, I'm delighted to say, more recently. So that education piece, hugely important. The second thing that I would talk about is the allyship, and that is the having somebody to talk to. And I think that is one of the main reasons why women struggle in the workplace, because they feel like they've nowhere to turn and nobody to talk to. I specifically see this in smaller organisations. A lot of large organisations have got those allyship programmes, which is brilliant, but for what I'm doing from the government strategy is overlaying that into smaller organisations so they've got somebody to talk to. But it may feel that if you work, so my only experience of the fire services, that I was married to a firefighter for 20 years, so it's probably, and I've been divorced from him for 12, so it's old news. But if you are on a fire station and it is predominantly men, it can be very isolated if you think you've got nobody to talk to. So that allyship programme is so important, and men can be phenomenal allies. In the workplace, often it's harder to get women to create allyship sometimes than it is men, because I've found that when I'm talking to leaders, female leaders, they don't want to often be associated with it because they think it may impact on if it's not impacting on them physically or mentally, they're worried that if they get involved in the conversation, it's putting them almost in an age bracket and, you know, maybe stimifying of their career potential. So it sometimes can be harder. One thing I have done is and it is very polarizing, and some organizations do not want to do it. Where it's worked really well. Particularly where I did one for DWP, it was an all-male, all-hands call, and they, at senior leadership level, they are very male-dominated, over 85%, and the middle management in DWP is predominantly female. So obviously that creates some challenges in being open in conversation. And I did an all-male, all-hands call that they were invited to, and I thought, in my experience of the two guys dialing in and the one guy being on the wrong call, I thought there'll be a handful, and this was only a few months ago. And I was on holiday at the time, and the lady from DWP texted me and said, just wanted to let you know it's on Monday, and we've currently got 946 men signed up to come on it. I was like, okay. But it was brilliant, because at first, once you got the conversation started and said, you can ask me anything. You know, I've just talked about one of my symptoms and I'm really comfortable doing that. If you get that, if you can say to somebody, ask me anything, that's what I'm here for. That's part of the privilege of the voluntary role, being able to get those conversations out there and get them started. And people tend to then open up and ask conversations. And one of the men on the call said to me, we absolutely want to help. We want to support. We're scared of saying the wrong thing. And I don't know whether he was applying that to the workplace or into the home, but you tend to find that once the conversation opens up about the workplace, it does tend to become more broad. So I think that's a really important thing to remember, that there is allyship there, but it's just about creating that safe space, if you need a safe space, to open up the conversation. The other thing that we did, which is low cost, high impact, and I recommend this to anybody who wants to do it. We have an inclusion brunch every Wednesday, which anybody in the organisation can dial into. 45 minutes. We cover a different topic every week. We started them off talking about menopause, and out of that we set up a networking group. So a lot of organisations have great networking groups. Our menopause one is called Hot Topics, but we have them for lots of different subjects, and they are employer led, so they are driven by the employees in the organisation. It's somebody to talk to, and then we've set up a more specific, if you just want one person to talk to, you can reach out using this method and talk to another individual. But that costs us nothing. And whenever I speak to organisations, I say, if you're only going to take one thing away, do that and set up something that is low cost, high impact. Because what we've found from that, we survey our staff twice a year using Your Voice, which is like a Peak on Qualtrics sort of tool. And the data has shown us that engagement, feeling of belonging, growth, and ED&I has grown incrementally over the last 2 years since we've been doing those inclusion brunches, because people feel that they are part of something and they feel well supported. So we are data-led as an organisation, and that's what the data is telling us. So those are things that you can pick up and utilise in your organisation, and I just thought it would be worth just giving you a quick overview of what the government role entails and what the strategy is that we launched yesterday at a roundtable event. So I'm just going to whiz through this, and then you can ask me any questions. So we're looking at 5 sectors. There's a 4-point plan looking at the 3 types of role, 2 types of symptom, but 1 key message. So these are the sectors that I've been asked to focus on: retail, hospitality, manufacturing, care, professional and technical. But I'm also looking at education, because education, I'm really passionate about that. 98% of the primary education workforce is female. That's not just teachers, that's anybody working in a primary school setting. And I'll come on to talk about types of role, but that is very much like many of yourselves, a non-autonomous role. You can't just choose to work in a different way, or maybe not show up or just walk away when you are having an issue. So those are the sectors that we're focusing on. Kicked it off with a roundtable event yesterday, and the 4 points of the plan. The first one is sector-specific best practice. So sharing best practice, making sure that the good stuff is getting shared around organisations. So taking away that element of using it as a competitive advantage, but sharing what the good stuff looks like and sharing it with other organisations that don't have access to that, and making sure it's the best stuff rather than just the generalist stuff. And we've got a lot of employers around the table who are more than willing to share with other organisations what they're doing, and then access to other guidance that you can get. But the point is, it's free because it's accessible for any woman anywhere and any employer anywhere, regardless of the size of budget. 90% of the UK economy is SME, and 3/5 of the population work for SMEs. They may not have access to a large budget to be able to support conversations like this. Second aspect of it is a national allyship programme, and I've talked to a lot of women who just feel like they may have to leave their job because they've nobody to talk to. Women over 50 are the fastest growing demographic in the workplace, and in your organisations, when it's a career organisation, when you bring women in, you want them to stay, and not everybody is as lucky as that and may not have anybody to talk to or anybody to support them. So a national allyship programme. Third aspect of it is signing a menopause pledge or a menopause pledge. There are a number on the market, but that's to help attract women into businesses and organisations, but retain them as well. And also the 630,000 women between 45 and 55 who are claiming job seekers allowance, universal credit. I've worked with the long-term unemployed. I know there are a lot of barriers to coming back into the workplace. If you've just got into perimenopause while you've been out of the workplace, that can be really challenging. So eliminating those barriers. And the last part of it is a national amplification strategy. So working with some real large organisations who are willing to amplify the message and support organisations. In that, aside from the fact that it's for every woman everywhere, regardless of race, ethnicity, socio-economic background, etc., I'm also looking at the 3 types of roles which will, I guess, be important to you. I was really lucky when I was going through perimenopause. I was in an autonomous role long before COVID came along and we could work from home. So I could pick and choose when I left the house. There were days when I didn't even stand up, let alone leave the house. But I had that autonomy in my role. There are semi-autonomous roles where you might have a bit of flex, you might not, but then there are the non-autonomous roles where you have quite simply got to show up. And it's important to consider all of those in the plan as well. And again, the two types of symptoms. There are practical symptoms which often impact the non-autonomous roles more, because those practical symptoms, like the 1 in 3 women who are experiencing incontinence post-menopause, the 44% that can experience extremely debilitating periods, vaginal issues where wearing a uniform makes it really, really challenging, or sitting down for long periods of time makes it really challenging. So those are the very practical issues that can affect women. But also there's the psychological as well, that feeling of, can I do this anymore? Have I still got it? Am I at the top of my game? The anxiety, the brain fog, which I've had twice today already, the loss of confidence, the insomnia, which leads to all of those can be really, really difficult and often affect women in more autonomous roles because they're often isolated and maybe working from home more regularly. So taking those into consideration as well. But I am really, the reason that I'm doing this role is because I feel it's a privilege to be able to advocate for women who haven't got the platform, the opportunity, and are really, really struggling or may just not have the confidence to speak up and speak to their employer. Because there is one really key message about menopause. It's an entirely natural but sometimes difficult period affecting 51% of the population. but I firmly believe it's not a time to step down, step back, or step out of your career, because if it's managed well in the workplace, you can arguably go on to have the most productive 10, 15, 20 years of your career after that. I am delighted that the interest rate has stopped going up today, but looking at the interest rate, I'll probably be working for probably another 15, 20 years. So I am hopeful that I'll be able to have the best 20 years of my career. Thank you very much for listening.